to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. I'm your host, Tom Dutta. We're live streaming today, and well, what is live streaming? You're peeking into the studio as we tape an international podcast and a YouTube premiere. We'll be bringing our guest out of the green room in just a moment. You'll want to find the Quiet Warrior Show podcast wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to it. Also, click the button where you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's Tom Dutta YouTube, so you can get the notifications of the shows as they come out. This is the live taping, no holds barred, and we're going to have a lot of fun today. It is with mixed emotions, this show, and it touches my heart because of my personal stories. And the guest that's coming on has a lot of courage to speak to us today. I want to first of all tell you a bit about the depth behind Mike McCarthy. Mike has worked as a journalist in newspapers, radio, television for almost 40 years as a producer, reporter, and presenter. Man, some of his assignments have included covering the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, terrorist attacks on the Boston Marathon, Canadian Parliament. I'm up here in Canada, touches my heart. Ottawa, the Manchester Arena in the UK, and his stories are wide-ranging. Mike also has interviewed, a little-known fact, all the UK prime ministers since 1970, including Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. He also had the privilege of meeting and interviewing somebody I felt was a legend, Muhammad Ali. And Mike lives in Yorkshire, UK, with his wife Glenys. And sadly, in February this year, his son Ross, age 31, took his life by suicide, and leaving a letter behind encouraging the family to start a campaign for better mental health services. And so today we're honoring the passing of Ross and Mike. So welcome to the show, Mike McCarthy.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for inviting me.
It's such a pleasure. And I just want to tell the audience how you and I met. I think I wanted to be sensitive to your time and your family. And I saw the posts on social media. You're in the UK, I'm here. And why I know, Mike, that you're a good man and you have a big heart is when I reached out and asked you to come on the show, you said it wasn't time. And that is a sign of a man who loved his son and was going through some difficult times. So how are you doing? It's been about 6 months.
I can't pretend that it's anything other than extremely difficult. I'm facing things that I don't recognize. I knew grief before we lost Ross, but this is different. This is deeper. It's more profound, and it's very, very difficult. But I wasn't sure how I'd get through the first day without Ross, and here I am 6 months on, and I'm surviving. The family are surviving, and we're trying to fulfill Ross's wish to campaign for better mental health provision.
Well, thank you, Mike. And, our sincere condolences to you, your family, and everybody really who's going to watch this today, because I know you have a lot of people out there supporting you. I want to, with your permission, show a picture. Picture says 1,000 words. Everybody, that is a picture of an amazing man, Ross McCarthy, age 31. What was the name of that dog there, Mike?
That was Bailey.
That was Bailey. Okay.
Yeah. Ross was always very fond of animals, and Bailey was his pet dog for a time.
Yeah, and I want to show another beautiful picture, and then we'll get into the story. Now, tell us who's in that picture besides Ross there.
Yeah, this is Ross with his fiancée Charlotte and his little boy Charlie, who was 3 years old when Ross died. He's now 4. That was what was supposed to be their wedding day, but they couldn't get married because of COVID. And Charlotte's wedding dress there is buried alongside Ross. They decided on what would have been their wedding day to dress in their wedding clothes, and friends came round, and one of their good friends took that picture.
Oh, my goodness. Well, first of all, I want to honor your courage. It's painful to talk even about the photo. What you just said, my mind went on a journey about the wedding dress being buried. Unbelievable. We'll put one more up here. This is one of my favorites. It's about family, and what a beautiful family there. I guess Charlie must have been just a few months there, right? Or a year or so.
Yeah, I think he's about a year old there, maybe just a little bit more. And that's my wife, Glenys, in the middle. And from the left, that's my daughter, Laura, and my other son, Tom. So we all as a family are going through this together.
Yeah, it's amazing. I read some things in the articles off news from the UK, and there was a quote from Laura. She referred to him as something about a happy or smiling puppy or some boundless energy, apparently. So, Mike, let's get into the story. I know it's difficult, but I think you and I share a common bond here of trying to lift the stigma. Just take us back and get us into the death of Ross. Tell us the story. Go as far back as you want. I read that he sought help for anxiety as early as 2011.
Yeah, Ross was a happy child. He was very happy at home, full of life, quite impish, mischievous at times, always the joker, always wanting to make people laugh. As he grew older, he became quite self-conscious and self-aware and started to suffer from anxiety and depression. He'd been struggling with severe depression for more than 10 years and fought what I believe was an heroic battle to conquer his demons. He sought help so many times. And actually, although, we're talking about suicide, Ross was one of those people who was life and soul of the party. If you saw him among his friends on a night out, he's probably the last person that you would point to and say that he was likely to take his own life. He was devoted to his family. He loved us and we loved him. We spoke about his mental health issues. That wasn't a problem for him to discuss them with the family. But he gave us so much laughter. He was funny, and we miss him beyond words. It's difficult to find the right expressions, the right descriptions to sum up what we feel we've lost, but in a kind of way, and I don't know whether other bereaved parents would recognize this, that now he's gone, I feel as though I've lost the boy that he once was, as well as the man that he became. And that's it, really. I don't know. One of the things about sort of this kind of grief is that, you tell yourself, don't go down the route of what if
Yeah.
done this, done that, said this, said that. But inevitably, maybe it's just sort of human nature that, you do ask questions about what you might have done the day before, the week before, the night of his death. And these are things that I do think about, although I try not to dwell on them, and we try as much as possible to carry Ross's memory forward and look to the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. We'll let you catch your breath there. Thank you for showing your vulnerability. It's courageous. I love you and your story of telling it. I want to just say that a lot of things are going on in my mind. I want to put up another picture here and then just mention why I put it up right now, because I thought, when am I going to put this up? That is a picture of the Lionsgate Bridge. It actually crosses over the ocean here in Vancouver. We're a port city, a beautiful city. And I'd like to tell you that's fog, but it's not. It's actually forest fires across in Washington that had been burning. And that picture I took just the other day, why I put it up there is you mentioned about Ross being happy, and I read a lot of things about that. And when I read those things, I thought, man, this really is part of the story. Here I am interviewing you, Mike, and a lot of people may not know, but I'm currently working through depression. Suicidal thoughts were part of that journey, anxiety. And yet, when I wake up in the morning, that's the way the world sometimes looks. It's as if your brain is in a fog, and sometimes you can't see through the fog, and you're searching for help. And one of the things that touched me about the story of interest was I read that Ross, had looked to get help, but I think there was a comment that it's the mental health support system beyond just trying to get diagnosed that was lacking. I want to just share this with you, and then we'll get you back into the story, Mike, that when I slipped into depression, you and I talked offline. Most people know I did a TED Talk in February 2020. I was a healthy guy, and I was riding my bike 225 kilometers to raise funds for cancer, slipped and fell in a bathtub bad, cracked my head, passed out, and led to 3 years now trying to get my life back. And at that time, I had no knowledge of depression and anxiety, but I slipped into it quickly, and I couldn't find help. And so we'll draw some parallels to the system here in Canada, that the psychiatrist, my GP, wanted me to see 2-year wait list. First counselor I tried to go see, 7-week wait list. And so this is a pandemic. And so let's go back into the story. There's another thing about COVID. I think Ross seemed to struggle with a third possible lockdown, or there was something he said about it felt like Groundhog Day. Can you just tell us about those last months before we lost him?
Yeah, as I said earlier, Ross had been struggling for 10 years to find some kind of solution, some kind of salvation. And he found that he couldn't really relate to the counsellor who was provided for him by the health services here. And in the end, he decided to go find his own counsellor and pay for his own counsellor. And he found someone who he could relate to and who he kind of registered with. And last Christmas, we celebrated the fact that the best part of 2020 was the fact that Ross's mental health had advanced so much and that he'd made so much progress. He had, in his words, thought that he'd cracked it. I think what happened, although we'll never know for sure, is that depression that he finally thought after all those years he'd shaken off came back with a vengeance. And after trying for so long, he felt that he had perhaps no other choice. I am so proud of Ross. I will always be proud of him till the day that I die. But I have to say at this stage that I think he did the wrong thing. I think there would have been salvation, and I think he would have found the help that he needed. But one thing that made life worse for him, it didn't kill him, but COVID and the restrictions that were imposed as a result of COVID played heavily on his mind. Ross was gregarious and outgoing, and although he was often depressed, you'd never know it. He was active. He liked to play tennis. He loved nothing better than to take his son Charlie to swimming, and all of these things had to stop. He wasn't able to take part in any of these sports. Worst of all, he was due, as I say, to get married to his fiancée Charlotte, and that had to be postponed. He couldn't see his family. Christmas was the last time that we saw him in the flesh, although we spoke to him virtually every day on the phone and on FaceTime. But the pressure that COVID brought, I think, put an extra weight on the burden that he was already carrying. And I think, again, it was one of the complexities that led to Ross taking his life.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm just going to read, I have my notes here. It's actually out of an article by one of the news publications out your way. I'll put it in the notes. This is a statement. Charlotte said in the days before his death, Ross struggled with fatigue and was stressed and angry about lockdown. He just wanted to be able to take our son to a cafe or go out for a meal. He was very fed up with it all. She said on February 20, he'd been drinking and watching football and FaceTiming his friends. His mood was improving, she said, and she went to bed at 9. And he sent her a text, 10, and it said, "Love you to bits. It will be off my chest now." She said, "I believed he would be okay the next day." So just I want to talk about something in that part of the story you just said, and thank you for sharing it, that I do a lot of work in the executive area of coaching, and I use a personality science that's out there, personality science assessment. And in learning about your son, I would say that he's what I call a a yellow personality. Dr. Hartman is the science behind this, and yellows basically are fun. Their motive is fun. They live for enthusiasm and excitement. You can't put a yellow in a room for a day and say go have fun, because they just don't want to be there. They want to be outside and experience the birds and the trees. So I really understand with COVID, and when I got concussed, Mike, I had my depression. I sat inside for a year, and it was extremely difficult. I read that COVID is a silent, they call it a silent pandemic or silent killer. And the rates of need for counseling and support have gone up dramatically because of COVID-19. So going back to Ross and the search for help, was he diagnosed properly before his death?
No, he never was. At the inquest, actually, we found out that there was no proper comprehensive diagnosis. Ross felt that he was bipolar, and there were various theories put forward, but he never did get a firm answer. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was that he was put on a 6-month waiting list. You mentioned, Tom, the waiting list situation in Canada. Ross was put on a 6-month waiting list, and wow. You know, to me, I regard what he was going through as cancer of the mind. It was, in effect, terminal. And I think that, you know, if someone had some other kind of terminal cancer, they would not be put on a 6-month waiting list. They would not be told to go away and come back in 6 months' time. And I'm sad. We're not angry as a family with anybody. We have a great health service over here, and there are thousands upon thousands of dedicated people working tremendously hard to do what they can. But I think that there are failings. I've spoken to quite a lot of people who are in a similar situation to us. Since we lost Ross, I decided to make it my business to learn what I could about mental health provision in this country, largely because of the request that Ross made in his letter. And I found that many people have been through a similar experience where they have been suffering depression or anxiety, some kind of mental illness for a long time, and have waited so long for medical help that they have eventually ended up taking their own lives. And I've also spoken to people who've been saved purely by chance when they were going to take their own lives. And it's pretty much conclusive to me that the vast majority of these people have found some shortcomings with mental health provision in the United Kingdom.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Mike, you're a nice guy and you're very polite. Let's go there. I'm going to do the mini rant because that's why I wanted to talk to you, because of my own story. It gives me a chance, and that's why it's a blessing. Ross has given me an opportunity to shine the spotlight on this topic yet again. And so I want to honor him. That when I was telling you, I fell and slipped into depression, I also had anxiety. Now, what I know is the clinical diagnosis of depression. I'm not a doctor, but the way it was told to me is 2 weeks or more of sadness without a trigger. So the way our brain works, from what I've learned through my own therapy, is you have a trigger. So if I think about Ross, that's a trigger. That triggers a thought. The thought can be positive or negative. The brain cannot have both at the same time. Then the brain attaches an emotion to that thought, or a feeling, sadness or happiness maybe, and then that drives the behavior. And the behavior is either something good or something that doesn't end well. So so here's my quick journey. When my GP finally said that you need to go see a counselor, I found a counselor, and I had a 6-week wait to get in. Now, Mike, I could have been sitting at home wanting to hang myself, and I was having some pretty shitty thoughts. 6 weeks, I said, are you kidding me? I'm a CEO. I mean, I have access to whatever I want when I'm building my company. When I was in the corporate sector, it just costs money. 6 weeks. When I finally get into a cancellation, I won't name names, and I'm sure that this individual had skills. I went to a room for 8 months and sat, and this is the way it was. Dimly lit room, nice environment, and I talked. And all I did was regurgitate and bring out all of my worries and concerns. I went from a CEO to a night stalker stalking produce at Costco. I walked in there feeling shame. I had felt I had let my family down. My income dropped. I was on the verge of not being able to even pay some bills. So for 8 weeks, 8 months, I paid money for that. And at the end of each session, she would hand me a little piece of paper, and I still have those, that said, do these 3 things, Tom. Journal 3 gratitudes, set some goals. And I went, what a bunch of crap. You're a counselor. And she says, you're in a cycle of depression, Tom. It's going to take a long time because of your concussion. It complicates it. But that was all she could do for me. I was told later that if you find a counselor who literally has you sit and looks down and makes notes while you talk, don't go back. Because the truth is, Mike, is that the brain, I'm not preaching, I just want to share this openly because I'm on your mission. The brain is wired for the negative. And so we need to put in, when we're in depression or anxiety, we need to put in more positive. If I'm going to sit in a room and just dump my negative thoughts and get nothing out of it, that pushes me back into this feeling of despair. Okay, go back to my GP. I said, I think I need to see a psychiatrist. This isn't really working. So I get rid of the counselor, and the GP says, well, I have a nice one, but 2 years. I said, really? 2 years? Well, find me another one. Well, there just isn't any around. She's on her computer in her office searching. Canada's a big place. I'm in Vancouver. It's one of the biggest cities. Okay, great. I finally get in to see a psychiatrist, and the world changes, because at that point he diagnosed me with depression, also picked up anxiety, put me on medication. But also, Mike, the other things that I learned 10 years in mental health at a leader level was it's more than medication and a diagnosis. And so I want to leave you this last point about my story, that I went in to see, well, 2 things. I went in to see through my concussion journey. I've been through 12 experts, doctors, neuro-ophthalmologists, psychiatrists. I went in to see this one psychiatrist who, she said, he's not my favorite, but let's try and get you in to see him. So I got in to see him, and he literally was one of the rudest people I'd met. And to be fair, he's not here to defend himself, but he asked me a bunch of questions, and he said, you're not looking after yourself. And if you don't look after yourself and take this medication, your brain's going to shrink. And he scared the hell out of me. And I looked at him and I said, well, and I was afraid of medication, Mike, because I'd heard all these stories about antidepressants and things having side effects, and I'd never taken them. Also, being from the corporate sector, I always feared when I was up in the sea level that if somebody found out through my medical records I was on these pills, they would judge me. Maybe I couldn't run the company. If I go apply for insurance, they would find that out. I wouldn't be able to get insurance. The stigma was there. The stigma was huge. So this guy, I say, thank you. I say, if something happens in the next couple of weeks, because I'm really uncomfortable with taking these, am I going to be able to call you? And he looks at me and says, we'll see you in 90 days. And I just left. I never went back to see him. I went to call my doctor. I said, I'll fire him. I said, I'm not going back to that guy. Maybe he's helped a lot of people, but not me. Finally, this is the box of medication they have me on now. They actually have me on 2. And this is called the escitalopram. So they put me on the psychiatrist I'm seeing now put me on that about 8-10 months ago. And I have friends who are very prominent in society, and just people also who just don't know much about mental health, that talk about these drugs. And so it says right on the box here, it says, may cause drowsiness and reduce alertness. Use care when driving or operating machinery. This is another thing of awareness I'm trying to bring to the world, is that drugs serve a purpose, but we got to do it right, and we've got to learn. So I'm not projecting on Ross, but Ross was trying to get help. He didn't have a formal diagnosis, and he's trying medication. Good for him. So I get on this, and I'm driving home from work one day and almost rear-ended somebody in a car. I literally almost fell asleep at the wheel. I phoned my psychiatrist after, and I said, I think it's the medication, because the experiment puts you on different levels of it. And he said, well, we should look at adjusting it. And he said, it shouldn't cause you drowsiness. Now, I love my psychiatrist, but I got to be honest with you. I said, it's on the box. And the pharmacist said, read this, because if you're going to drive or whatever, you got to be aware of that. Yet, it's not going to cause drowsiness. So the second drug I'm on is an amphetamine of some kind that actually pushes you up. All right. This is the beginning of my understanding that the other thing we need to get the word out about, Mike, and the stigma is medication. We have to be careful. You mentioned Ross thought he was bipolar. I just want to ask you quickly before I tell you what this other piece here. How did he think that? How did he feel he had bipolar?
Do you know, Tom, I don't know the answer to that question, although we talked about his mental health. Ross was his own man, and there was a lot sort of going on in his life that I don't know about.
Okay,
fair enough. He with having such problems with mental health, he was someone who tried to get to the root of it. And he tried desperately to sort of try and find some way out of it, and through that doing research to find out what may have caused it. And certainly that was the conclusion that he had reached, but exactly why, I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I understand. There's a fella, I did a 3-part series. His name's Bob Krulish. He's an American, and you can find it in my archives. And we called him Bipolar Bob. And Bob will tell the story, but he basically was a very successful guy. I think he almost somebody wanted him to run for senator in the U.S. He had a genius brain, and they misdiagnosed him with depression. This was a diagnosis by a practitioner. They put him on medication. And what I learned from talking to Bob is that if you're on antidepressants, yet they don't pick up the bipolar, you can be sent into a state of manic. Bob told on the show he was in a manic state for 3 years. And the reason why they never figured it out is because he said, when you go to your psychiatrist, you don't always tell them, because of the shame of it, that you're doing all these weird things. You're just going in there in a fog, and you're hoping they'll extract that out of you. Bob now is on his 56th iteration of his medication, and he's doing much better. He's teaching, he's doing therapy. But my point for bringing that up is that this is another thread, Mike, that we have to work on, is that the psychotropic drugs, these medications are good. We have to educate people why you need to be on it, make sure that they're on it the right way, and also put out a word that if you're not diagnosed, society has to step up and get people proper diagnosis. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'll pass it back. I'm sorry for going on a rant here, because this really triggered what you said about Ross. It really triggered this in me, and I need to get it out. That Anthony Bourdain, we lost way too early. The chef. I'm a home chef. I grew up escaping my childhood by cooking. I used to watch Bourdain's shows, and it wasn't until this chapter of my life that I started going, wait a minute. Throughout his shows, he's drinking like a fish. He's eating. He's not getting his rest. And he kept saying he was on Lipitor. He was on antidepressants. So another thread. They found him by the story, he had taken his life. But there is truth to this. When I went off these, I ran out. I was just silly, and I didn't renew it. I started having these bizarre feelings. I won't get into it, but I called up my psychiatrist, said, can you do my renewal? I forgot. And he gave me hell. The email I still have. He said, I'm really upset with you for that, Tom. He said the side effects of even missing 1 or 2 days of this could put you into serious risk. And my brain started doing things that I couldn't even figure out. I had nightmares and things happening that was just, so you can't just take medication and then forget and come off it. So how does Ross, someone like Ross, get diagnosed, get help in a timely manner? And I love what you said about cancer of the brain. You're absolutely right. If I had a problem with my heart, I'd be into the doctors in a minute. So my rant is over. I'm going to turn it back to you, sir. And anything you want to say on any of that? What are you trying to do now, raising awareness? What do you think is what's broken the system, or anything? Where do you see the pathway to maybe making some inroads?
I think there are many points there, Tom. And I think, first of all, returning to the subject of just simply talking about mental health and suicide, I think it still lurks in a dark corner, and many people want it to stay there. I respect that everybody has a different way of dealing with sensitive subjects like this and with grief. Within my family, for example, there are people who don't necessarily want to talk about suicide, and I have to respect that. This is just the way that I feel. This is my own personal opinion. I'm not an expert. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. Until we lost Ross, I knew very little about mental health. I still don't know that much, but I know a lot more than I did when Ross left us. So that's the first thing. Despite everything that I've said there, I do believe that sunlight is the best anesthetic. As a journalist for 40 years, it's been at the core of what I've done. I've often had to speak to people in moments of trauma themselves, and you mentioned some of the stories that I've covered over that 40 years or so. So I think, expecting people to speak to me and to record interviews for television or whatever in a situation like that, I cannot then be quiet about what I think is a real scandal. And thank you for describing me as polite. That may or may not be true, but I do know that it is a scandal. I have no hesitation in referring to it as a scandal. I think the amount that we spend on mental health is woeful. The amount of attention we give to mental health is woeful. The parity of esteem, if you will, that we give to physical illness as opposed to mental illness just is not there at all. There is no parity. If you go to hospital with cancer, you know where to go. There's an oncology department, there's a urology department, there's a maternity department, but go there with mental health problems and the situation suddenly becomes far more difficult, far more messy, far more unclear. And I think we've got to get away from this Victorian attitude that we have towards mental health. I think we've got vast improvements that we can make, both from recognizing the various conditions associated with mental health, talking about those conditions and providing the right medication and whatever treatment is necessary. You made the point, Tom, and it's an extremely valid point, that you could go to hospital with a broken arm and receive far more attention, far quicker attention. I, for example, at the moment have a slight minor issue with my nose. I've got to have an operation, and when I go to the hospital, there's a consultant there, there's a nurse there. Every time it's the same group of people, they have my records. And yet, having spoken to all the people that I've spoken to on Zoom, on the phone, wherever, around the world, people are saying the same thing. I was amazed when, in the early days after Ross took his life, I went on LinkedIn, a business platform, and put on a post about the phrase commit suicide, because I'd heard even mental health professionals using that phrase commit suicide. And as most of us know now, I think, it's outdated because it relates to a time when suicide was considered to be a crime. Ross may not have done the right thing, but he never committed a crime. In this country, the illegal status of suicide was lifted in 1961, 40 years ago, 40 years. And here we are still using the phrase commit suicide. And my feeling is that if we can't get to grips with that and we can't address that, then what hope have we got of going to the core of the problems, which is really lies within the health service. And I can't stay silent. I can't turn my back on the people who I've spoken to who have tried to take their own lives, to the mothers and fathers who've lost daughters and sons, who all say the same thing, that they feel that the mental health services let them down and let their children down. In this country, suicide is the main killer of young men under 45, not cancer, not road accidents, not drugs. It far outweighs, in terms of the statistics, those kind of other issues. if that's not a pandemic, I don't know what is. In a few years' time, when hopefully COVID will be a distant memory, suicide, tragically, I believe, will still be there. The figures are not going in the right way. They haven't been going in the right way for many, many years, for a generation. Actually, they rise and they fall, but basically, there hasn't been an improvement. Where's the discussion? Where's the political discourse? Where's the debate in Parliament? Who are the politicians who are trying to highlight this? Yeah, they exist, but I'm not sure where they are. When I posted that simple post about the phrase committed suicide, I thought I'd get a few comments maybe.
Yeah.
It's a business platform after all, and a post about suicide. Who's interested? I actually got more than 750,000 views.
Yeah.
And I'm
Amazing.
still dealing with the backlog of people who message me directly, and I do intend eventually to respond to them all.
Yeah.
But of those more than 750,000 people, there was one politician, just one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I've got to go find that post. And everybody, this is a teaching moment from Mike about suicide, and we need to have the conversation about the numbers. Mike, research shows that, and I talked about this on another show I did, that 80% of human beings have some form of trauma, and trauma is just unresolved things that happened in the past that are not good. 80% of society. If you talk to Oprah Winfrey, it's 90%, which is probably more like it. So here's the thing, man. I am up at the top in my career, and I totally honor what you just said. I'm looking around. I'm looking also at athletes. And by the way, the Olympians came out and started sharing their, but I'm looking around going like, why do I always feel there's something wrong with me and I'm the only one? That's why, because the people around me aren't talking about it. But the truth is, Ross and me and others, we're part of the majority, man. We're not the minority. And 10 years ago, I wouldn't discuss this. Here's a simple thread from my TED Talk. You asked me about my TED Talk earlier. When I drafted the speech with a coach, I sent it out to 10 of my CEO buddies. And I don't want to throw anyone under the bus here. I got back lots of support. And then this one guy said, have you ran it by your peer group, your CEO peer group? Have you ran it by those that you're coaching? In other words, what would people think of you because your livelihood is coaching people how to be stronger mentally? What would they think of you, Tom? And I went into this gut punch, a tailspin, and it really bothered me. And that proved to me, and I said to my coach, I can't get past this because this guy I know, and he's a friend. She said, your talk's right on, Tom, because you poked him. You poked him where it hurts. You poked him where his real pain is. And so now more people are coming out of the woodwork to talk about it. I called out on my TED Talk, Mike, and I know you've seen it, the top level of business. And so I'm on a mission to start there. And so we'll collaborate. But here's the thing. There was an article that Walmart put out a while ago. And it was an article that said they were looking at putting in clinics, mental health clinics in their stores. Beautiful idea. Read the whole article. And now when I look at articles, people ask me to look at them to find the gap because I see it through a different lens. I say, you know what's missing there? Because they said in the article, it's a good thing, but I wonder if people shopping in Walmart would be seen walking into a clinic. It's like, who cares? Nowhere in that article was there a quote from the CEO of Walmart. It was a huge opportunity, Mike, to say, I'm excited and thrilled to bring these services to the people. And by the way, I had a friend long ago who dealt with depression, and I walked beside them, and I knew that they needed help, and it wasn't there in the time they needed it. So when leaders can lift the stigma, if they can start talking about their own stories, because I said in my TED Talk, Mike, like you, I'm proud of you, man, the courage of a leader to get out and talk about their story, but the leaders aren't doing it. So I never thought I'd say this because it just came to my head, but your prime minister, I challenge you to tell him to come on my show and share with me a story of vulnerability about some experience. And here's what I said to the board members that were on the mental health board when I was chair. We went recruiting for board members. I said, or we said, you need three things. Bring a skill that's going to help. Number two, tell us your story. Why mental health? Your lived experience. Why? Because if you have lived experience, you're going to stay the course. And third one is just technical. So we had our first board meeting, and it was at a golf course. And I said, everybody tell your story. So here's a couple quick ones. We go around table. I said, okay. And there's a lady that I know from financial services. She said, well, 5 years ago, I laid down on my bed with a bucket of pills, and I tried to kill myself. And she said, I woke up the next day in a hospital, and they had handcuffs on me, because when you try to take your life, they have to investigate it. She said, this is the first time I could get back to work. I'm so happy to be on this board. Next was a professor from University of British Columbia, super nice man in his senior years. He turns and he points to the golf course, because we're in a boardroom near a golf course in Richmond, British Columbia. He said, see that 18th hole there? He said, I was standing there with a shotgun under my chin, and Dr. Remick, was on our board at the time. He saved my life. And we went around and around and around. There's also somebody I want you to meet, John McComb, who came on my show. Who's a 45-year award-winning journalist who had panic attacks on the air, and a decade ago came out. He won the Order of Canada for explaining that he was ravaged from this depression. I found his mother dead on the floor from medication, a raging alcoholic father like mine was. All of these people, when we sat in that boardroom, Mike, it was like home. All of us felt comfortable sharing our stories. So here's why I believe leaders don't. When I coach leaders in the cone of silence, it's confidential. We start with an update. Let's talk about family, personal life, and your business. What's working, what's not. And they show up with blood on their shirts. The wife wants to walk out on me. I had a board meeting. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. I'm drinking too much. I'm overweight. Did you know, Mike, that over 70% or more of people in general in the world have anxiety? Whereas I thought there was something wrong with me because we got labeled. The truth is, if your dog dies, you might be down, you might be a bit depressed, and you might be anxious about the burial. But that's normal. Here's something I wanted to put up here about anxiety. This is a workbook, and I'll get into that. This is a definition of anxiety I was taught through a course called Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, which I want to share this program with you. Anxiety, for thoughts associated with a feeling of anxiety, nervousness, or fear, the anxiety equation. So the numerator, Mike, is the belief that bad stuff will happen. The denominator, the belief that I will be able to handle it, equals anxiety. And then it goes on and it says, which part of the equation should you focus on first? When they put me on medication, they also got me into a cognitive behavioral therapy program, which 9 weeks in a classroom with 14 people who were seriously ill, multiple personality disorders, bipolar. Dude, when I went in there, I thought, geez, my life's not that bad. It was unbelievable. There's a young girl there who reminded me of my daughter who cried just involuntarily, and my heart broke. These guys, at the end of the course, 9 weeks, we learned 166 skills on how to actually live with mental illness, not just medication, but how to actually use neuroplasticity and the way our brain actually has a gift. I never knew any of that. So at the end, the two teachers, one was a counselor and one was a psychiatrist, they said, what is one thing all of you take away from this? And unanimously, everybody's hand went up and they said, why isn't this being taught to children in schools? Why didn't we learn this when we were young? And you know what the answer was, Mike? Well, unfortunately, you have to be diagnosed with a mental illness before you can get access. This course would have cost $4,000 roughly, not covered by a lot of medical. So I went online and I Googled cognitive behavioral therapy, and I found a guy in the UK, or I think he's UK, who does an online university level course on it. So you know what I did? I thought, I'm just going to buck the system. So I took the course, got my certificate. And what I've done now is in my coaching practice, when I coach leaders, I've put in there 10 different CBT skills, cognitive behavioral therapy, teaching them how as leaders, they can prevent their brains from having challenges, how they can learn some of these things about managing anxiety and stress. And the response has been, I wish I had learned this before I started parenting my son. I wish I had known this. Why aren't they teaching this? So you and I are going to do some parallel work together, Mike, because I think between us, you could use my platform as a megaphone, but there's stuff we're going to that I want to support your mission, Ross, and thank you for letting me rant on this. This is literally a course that everyone, including Ross, could have had access to. CBT is known around the world and is basically teaching your brain how your cognition, how to manage your cognitive thoughts. And if you slip into depression and anxiety, you do need some meds, but meds alone doesn't do it. Once what they told me about antidepressants is, I didn't know this, it's like sprinkling your brain with fertilizer. Because when the brain has this thing that changes the chemical imbalance, you fertilize it, and then you do homework and skills, and you learn, right? There's one skill in here, by the way, it's called the opposite action skill. It's so simple. If you're afraid of doing something, you take the opposite action, right? It teaches me how to replace my thoughts. If I'm having difficult thoughts, how do you replace that? And I'll finish with this, that human beings are the only species on the planet, Mike, that can attach a different meaning to a thought. It's bizarre. Plants and animals can't. That's why my little Shih Tzu dog, who passed away last year, slammed the door on her tail, and she just keeps wagging because she can't think about it. My father passed away January 18, and he was an alcoholic, a commanding officer in the military. And I was a black and blue kid, and I tell this story not for shame, but today I say I love Dad. And the demons that my dad had from his own childhood became my gifts. And so I had to change the meaning of what my dad was to me to be able to move forward. So there's so much, Mike, that you and I and whoever you're working with are going to do together to make an impact. We're publishing another book now, and in that book, I'll send you the manuscript where I've putting 10 cognitive behavioral therapy skills. And I've got 10 other people who have brought their stories of depression, anxiety, and mental health to the book. It's fully illustrated. And we're making a feature film. We'll talk about that offline more, but you might be able to find some interest in that, where we're trying to do a film that's going to have threads of mental health. Imagine a film that would show a business leader navigating through his life, but the film was a narrative style with a little voice that played of what he actually saw. So that's why when I read up on Ross, I go, yeah, I get it. He's the happy little puppy, but he's the fog inside, man. And here's the thing I would want to tell Ross if I knew him. First of all, I love you, Ross. Secondly, that this I learned in CBT. This will blow your mind if you haven't heard it, Mike. Most of the thoughts we have are not necessarily true. Think about that. As a journalist who's talked to a lot of people, most of the thoughts we have are not necessarily true, because most of the thoughts are put in us by what we bring in through our senses into our subconscious, and a lot of it's not true. So if somebody said you're fat, you're ugly, my dad used to say things to me, you're not good enough. Even though I became successful, my brain would tear it down, saying, no, you're not, work against me. Yeah. We don't know what Ross heard or what was said to him. And when I do my coaching, I find that in my program, that one, I call it in the program here, it's called a track, like on a vinyl record. All of us, including you, maybe when you dig and you do this type of work, you have one or two tracks on your vinyl record in your brain that overrule your life. Some of the common ones are, I'm not good enough, right? Things never work out. I don't look good enough. So when I think of people like Ross and when I discovered that, the thing I was thinking over and over in my head, Ross being, he wrote that note about Charlie, you can tell us about not having flaws. And I love what somebody said, it might have been you, is that how did Ross start thinking he had flaws? When I read that, and you can talk about this when I give it back to you. The point is, probably because of something that was put in his head that he couldn't control and it took over. The good news is, and I think you're right, if he hadn't been in that frame of mind at that point in time, maybe he'd still be here today. I'm going to give it back to you on the last thing I want you to talk about, Mike. This has been a great hour with you, and I appreciate the time. Is going forward now, talk about self-care, and you've got a family that are going through grieving, and yourself. What are some of the things that advice to others who might go through this journey that you all are doing just to take care of yourselves?
First and foremost, thank you, Tom, for your wisdom and insight. There's so much there, that means so much to me, and I can relate to, and that I can relate to Ross and his life. But from my own perspective, I think just talking to people, and as a journalist, sometimes I used to, worry about what I said to people. I think I may have mentioned this. Speaking to people in situations of trauma, and I used to wonder about what I could say or do to make them feel any better. Was there anything at all that I could do, or should I just go in and do the interview and leave it at that? But what I've discovered over the past 6 months, and I think what the family have discovered, is that it does make a difference, that there are people out there who are going through the same kind of thing. Tragically, there are hundreds of thousands of us around the world. So desperate though it is, you're not alone, and people are willing to talk to you and share their experiences with you. Again, going back to the LinkedIn post and the 750,000 views, it made me realize that there's an avalanche out there, almost pent-up avalanche, waiting to talk about mental health, wanting to share their stories, wanting to break down the barriers and break down the stigma. So that support is out there, whatever you may think in terms of the lack of discussion and debate and all the rest of it. The support does exist, and it's not going to bring Ross back. We have to accept that nothing will ever bring him back, but it made me feel like people had got my back, and people like yourself, Tom, when you reached out, along with so many others, it made me realize that it's a good world. There are some good people, and there are people who are willing to support you and invest in you, who very often don't even know you.
Yeah.
And that's been very, very important to me, and going forward, I think I've come to accept that I'll never get away from the what if kind of mentality, no matter how hard I try. But I try also to remind myself that it was the illness that took Ross. It was the illness. It wasn't a bad background necessarily, or not at all. In his case, it was, as I say, it was a sort of, he had a happy childhood. We were a close family. We're a loving family. We loved him. He loved us. We know that. So I have to sort of try, despite these maybe natural sort of human instincts, I have to try to remind myself that, the illness is there, and as a father, I couldn't do anything about it. Things that I wished that I had done, to be perfectly honest about it. I'm a dad, and I try to fix things as a dad, and that's what you do for your kids. You try to fix things. Maybe I should have spent less time trying to fix Ross and more time just trying to listen to the sort of beautiful person that he was. So I know that there'll be a better future. Somebody said to me that this kind of grief is like, I don't know whether you've ever seen a tree grow around a metal railing or a rock, and it sort of takes it into the bark and becomes part of the trunk of the tree. And that kind of resonates with me. I think, it's there. It'll never go away. It'll be part of me, and it'll be in the core of me, but I will grow around it. And if this life, to use a cliche, if this life is a journey, Ross may not be with us any longer physically, but he's still part of our journey, and I know that he's going to go forward with us. That's important, that he's still very much a part of this family and will always be. And although we miss him desperately, we'll never ever forget him, and we remember him with such huge affection.
Ross, there's another picture of Ross up there. Everybody, we're talking to Mike McCarthy about the loss of his son to suicide in February this year. He was 31 years old. Mike, in the last few minutes, not that you aren't real, this is a teaching moment. I want to share that when you become emotional like that, you become even more real, and it makes me say it's okay to say you're not okay. I want to give you a couple of things about self-care that I learned, if I can share this. You can look up the book Giving Grief Meaning. And I did a radio show with a lady named Lily Dulan, Dulan. And she wrote this book, and she lost her daughter at 2 years of age to SIDS on Christmas Eve. And she researched, she's a healer, and she came up with something called the name work framework. Now, the reason why I'm sharing with you is because I applied it on my father's death, and it changed my thinking. So my words of my dad, when I thought of my dad's name, his name's Ashok, A-S-H-O-K. My parents are from Fiji. My grandparents, India. I was born in England, came here to Canada. I used to think these were the words I defined my dad by when I was angry and hurt from what he did. Alcoholic, raging drunk, sloppy drunk, womanizer, and on and on and on. And so what she said is, she said words and things define the world around us. Remember, I was saying to you that in my therapy I did, your brain basically has thoughts. That's all it is a thinking machine, and you can control what the thoughts are. So you have a choice. So I took the name Ashok, A-S-H-O-K, and she said, I want you to assign, she did this live on my show so you can watch it. She said, I want you to, we will together assign a characteristic or a trait to each letter that puts your father in a light where it changes the way you feel. So I came up with this, A for author. My dad wrote a book. He was a technical trainer, electrician, and he taught at our technical institute. I forgot that because I hadn't seen him all my life. A for author. H was hero. When my dad died, I made a connection to him 3 months before, and then he died of a heart attack. He was 22 years in AA, dry of alcohol. I think my dad struggled with anxiety and depression from his own childhood because his father was an alcoholic. And so S8, when we did the funeral, people came up after I didn't know and said, your dad was a hero. He used to talk to us. He helped my daughter. My dad was doing meditation groups and all these things I didn't know. So H for hero. O for omnipresent. She helped me with this one because but through the work I do as a thought leader, I want my dad's story, a happy one now, to be everywhere. And then K, S-A-S-H-O, K for karma, because dad always used to say, don't ask for anything, work hard, it's going to come back to you. And that's what he did. He worked very hard. So now when I say the word Ashok, just think about this. I'm going to say Ashok, and then that's going to trigger you. You're going to think about Ashok was an author, told stories and helped many people. Ashok was a hero. He helped save people's lives. Ashok was omnipresent. He lives in me. I love him, and he's everywhere through me. Ashok is karma, because it always comes back to you when you think positive thoughts. Now, how do you feel? So I started doing meditation and those affirmations just on my dad's name, and today, that's all I think about. So try that with Ross, and it might make a difference for you. Anyway, I had a video I wanted to play, but I think, Mike, we probably are used up most of your time. It's about 3 or 4 minutes. Do you have a few more minutes to put that on?
Of course I do. Yeah.
Because I'm going to connect you to Dr. Ron Remick, who actually you'll see in this video, who's actually my psychiatrist. But 12 years in 2012, they came up with this rapid access model that got the attention of the Canadian government. They brought it to the Mood Disorders Association of British Columbia, where I sat on the board, and we actually implemented it, and we changed the wait time for access if people were having a mental health situation from months and years to literally days. The biggest challenge we ran into over time was funding, but the model is amazing. And the only reason I got in to see the psychiatrist is because of Dr. Remick. I had that relationship. Otherwise, I might still be waiting. So I want to play that video. We're going to watch it together for a few minutes. I'll send you a copy. This everybody tells you why I believe that Mike and his family and Ross's wishes are on the right track. So just stand by if I can remember how to do that. I'm going to share my screen here. Share screen. All right, we're going to go to, there it is. All right. So I'm going to go back and put Ross and I, there we are. So we're together on the screen, and let me just start that.
I'm a psychiatrist. My name is Dr. Chris Gorman. I work at St. Paul's Hospital and have an academic affiliation with the University of British Columbia. I've been a psychiatrist for 27 years. Started out in Calgary at the Foothills Hospital. Spent the last 4 or 5 years in San Diego, being part of the University of California, San Diego campus there, and then came up here about 3 years ago to resume working with Dr. Remick.
My name is Ron Remick. I'm a psychiatrist. I have been practicing here in British Columbia all my career as a psychiatrist, which has been for 34 years. I think in terms of psychiatric care in British Columbia, the biggest concern or problem that I see is access to psychiatric care. Patients just can't get in to see a psychiatrist for an evaluation or an assessment. Typically, it takes 5 to 6 months, which is unacceptable. It's just far, far too long to have an evaluation.
It's been the same challenge that seems to be getting worse over time. People being able to get seen at all, or certainly to be seen early enough. Studies suggesting that if you treat depression within 2 weeks of the referral, the outcomes are considerably better than if people have to wait longer. And then once patients are in care, having resources available so they can get the treatments that are being recommended.
As a specialist, we are typically, the way patients get to see us is they're referred by family doctors. And there have been research here in British Columbia showing that many family doctors have just given up even trying to refer for a psychiatrist. It's far too long. And so they make do, or they do the best they can. Clearly, they have some questions or feel uncomfortable that this is out of their comfort zone or their expertise. That's why they want a consultation, and they may or may not be doing the right kind of treatment.
And that was why we started this clinic, essentially, was to see if we could make a dent in at least increasing access to care initially, but then ultimately to provide care so that people could get better quickly and get back to their lives.
The concept is to see people with similar medical disorders, what are called homogeneous disorders, in the same venue, because it's much more efficient than seeing 6, 8, 10, 15 people, one after another individually, giving them the same medical treatment, giving them the same advice, answering these same questions to them. We thought that mood disorders and anxiety disorders, mood disorders are depression and what used to be called manic depression or bipolar illness, and anxiety disorders, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, are very similar disorders. They're homogeneous disorders, and the treatment, the biological treatment or the psychological treatment, is very similar for those types of disorders. So we thought that by seeing these type of people in a group setting, we would be able to be much more efficient. And indeed, if we see 8 to 10 people in a 1-hour group where a psychiatrist typically sees individually a patient for at minimum 30 minutes and sometimes 45 or 60 minutes, we'd be 4, 5, 6 times more efficient. and we'd be able to offer the same kind of direction in terms of treatment in a group setting.
One of the concerns that many patients have is they're anxious, and if you're depressed or anxious, you feel vulnerable. So it's hard to go into a group of people. You've never met these people. You don't know what they're going to be like. Will they breach your confidence? And they may bring you down. Patients will say, well, I'm already depressed, and if I sit in a room and there's somebody else that's more depressed, that's going to bring me down. And we know from research that the capacity.
What we're going to do is just we're going to stop that video. Hold on, Mike. All right. I know that's probably got your brain going in different directions. It's about a 7-minute video. I'll put it in the show as an addition. But the good news is that I've been on a mission because of meeting Dr. Remick, and really because of my interest in just knowing about mental health. My younger brother has Tourette's syndrome, which I think was triggered by the violence in my home when my dad drank. That there's a model out there, and there's a will to change the system. I want to ask you one more question that came to my mind, if you'll honor us with a couple more minutes, about culture. Mike, from being at the top in my career, there's a program in Canada called the Best Managed Companies Program, and they have a scorecard, and to win it, if you're a CEO in a company, you have to fill out a scorecard. Most leaders, whether you're an entrepreneur, self-employed, top leader, prime minister, journalist, if you're involved with people in an organization, you own culture. So you own the culture. And everything in business, they say culture trumps everything else. So in my TED Talk, I talked about creating a courage culture, so it's okay to say you're not okay. And so squarely, when you look at all the work you've done, talking to people, organizations, have you found out there a culture or an understanding that culture has to change in the world to create this safe space? It has to change in every organization, and what comes out of a leader's thoughts and mouth has to change. We have to start at the top. Have you getting thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's, absolutely the case. I think, it has to come from the leaders. And I think, it's a good place to end on, because all the awareness in the world is not going to create change. And I think the key thing that's come across at the moment is that, we're getting better in terms of awareness. We're getting better in talking about mental health and depression and anxiety. And now it's high time that we started to change. And I think just as the leaders are the ones who control the culture of an organization, they're the ones who ultimately can trigger change within their organization. And I think that we've been talking about this for long enough now. The situation has been with us for long enough. We're aware of the scale of the problem. 800,000 people every year take their own lives around the world. 800,000 people. And I think the next step is for politicians or business leaders to recognize that groundswell that I was talking about of reaction in the LinkedIn post that I wrote about the phrase committing suicide. The groundswell of support is there from the people, from us. The groundswell is there. It's now time for people to capture that groundswell and to use it to make change. It won't come overnight, but I do believe that the time is absolutely right for change. And I do believe, despite everything, I'm optimistic. I do believe that in years to come, we will look back and hopefully recognize the advance and the progress that we've made in terms of mental health and supporting people with mental illness. I really do believe that there is a far better time to come in terms of turning the culture around and turning treatment around.
Yeah, thank you. Mike, very well said. I just want to put a comment up on the screen that came in a while ago. There it is. There are people out there who understand that culture has to be created. CEOs have to create a culture. If you're a company that wants to innovate, you create an innovation culture. The CEO has to say, hey, to innovate, you have to make mistakes. And if you make mistakes, we're not going to kick you out. And when that culture starts, and the good news, Mike, is the tide is turning because the reticular activating system, which is part of your brain, filters out lots of information. If we focus on the stigma and have telling stories and talking, there's lots going on out there. We're just not giving it the attention. So I want to put out a challenge. Mike and I are on a parallel mission. I'll finish with this before we honor you as we wrap up, Mike, that Mike's on a mission to carry on Ross's vision of mental health access to helping others before it's too late. And I'm on a parallel mission, Mike, of lifting the stigma at the top, and in any way we can, teaching business leaders how to do that so we can create that courage culture. So, Mike, I'm going to honor you. You're getting an award today. You might not have known this, but I'm going to just full screen me for a moment as we show you that. There's a bit of a thing behind me there, and there's a guy, kind of looks familiar. Mike, that's a challenge coin. And when I started the show, we're approaching 200 episodes. I had no idea it would go this way. And I said I wanted to have an award that would be given to people who came with no ego, checked their egos at the door, and actually were on a mission, a purposeful mission to make an impact on the world. Challenge coins were started in World War I. They were carried by soldiers to commit community. And today they're used around the world. First responders, Alcoholics Anonymous has their version. And so this is the challenge coin for the show. It's handcrafted and painted. The back of it is actually a beautiful illustration of the hero's journey narrative by Joseph Campbell, which talks about the seeking we do to find our purpose. The front is obviously the show art. I'll be sending it to you, get it to you when I can. And to honor Ross, we're going to send 2 coins. One so that you can honor your amazing son, who I have a connection to now. I'll be working hard for the rest of my life. By receiving this, you continue to keep doing what you're doing. Never stop telling your story until we succeed at lifting this thing and finding rapid access. Congratulations.
Tom, thank you. I'm humbled and honored by your award, and I'm full of strength and inspiration from our discussion. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So everybody, find that true passion and purpose like Mike did. Sometimes it doesn't always come in a nice way, and live with that true purpose and live the life that you deserve and desire and make an impact. And we'll have you back again, Mike, and get your Prime Minister to come on the show and tell a story of how he's trying to change the culture in your country. And I'll work on that. I'll work on that with Justin Trudeau, and maybe we'll do it together. All right. Stand by while we wrap this show up.
Thank you for listening to The Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca